You've entered void of rules, a realm where normal constraints cease to exist. But beware, traveller, there is one rule here. You've got to hit subscribe. Seriously, it's the only rule we have. We just reached 1,000 brave souls, and we're hunting for 9,000 more to complete our dark ritual. I mean, reach our next goal, so subscribe. Or don't. But remember, the void remembers those who defy the only rule. Now let's get into today's video. The pen trembled slightly in Gerald's weathered hand as he signed my hiring paperwork. I noticed because everything else about him was unnaturally still. The way he sat, the way he breathed, even the way his eyes tracked across the documents. Like a man who'd learned that sudden movements could be dangerous. Congratulations, Tyler. His voice carried the weight of someone delivering a death sentence, rather than a job offer. Night maintenance, Terminal A West section. You start tomorrow. The office felt smaller than it should have, crammed behind the main information desk like an afterthought. Airport sounds filtered through the thin walls, distant announcements, the rumble of jet engines, the endless shuffle of travellers who had no idea what happened in their absence. The fluorescent light above us flickered intermittently, casting shifting shadows across Gerald's face that made his expression impossible to read. I should have been relieved. 3 months of unemployment had drained my savings and my confidence in equal measure. The retail management job I'd held for 3 years had evaporated in a round of corporate downsizing, leaving me scrambling for anything that would pay the bills. Night maintenance at an airport wasn't glamorous, but it was steady work with decent benefits. But something about Gerald's demeanour made celebration feel premature. Gerald opened his desk drawer with deliberate slowness and withdrew a manila folder. The words, Night Maintenance Protocols, Terminal A West Section, were typed across the front. But I noticed something else. The edges were worn smooth, as if many hands had gripped this folder with desperate intensity. The paper itself looked aged, yellowed around the corners despite what should have been recent printing. These are your lifelines, Gerald said, placing the folder on the desk between us. His fingers lingered on its surface for a moment longer than necessary. You don't read them until you clock in tomorrow at 10 p.m. Not at 9:59, not at home tonight. 10 p.m. sharp in the maintenance workshop. Vincent will be there. Something cold crawled up my spine. Vincent? Your trainer. He's been doing this for 8 years. Gerald's eyes held mine with uncomfortable intensity. He's alive because he follows rules. The people who came before you weren't as careful. The casual mention of death in a job interview should have sent me running. Instead, I found myself leaning forward. What happened to them? Gerald was quiet for so long, I began to wonder if he'd heard me. When he finally spoke, his voice had dropped to barely above a whisper. Some jobs have learning curves. This one has a cliff. You either follow the rules exactly or you don't come home. I reached for the folder, but Gerald's hand slammed down on top of it. The sound echoed in the small space like a gunshot, and I jerked back in my chair. Tyler. His knuckles were white where they pressed against the manila paper. In 24 hours, you're going to read 6 rules. They will seem strange. They will seem arbitrary. One of them will seem completely insane. You will be tempted to think we're hazing you, or testing your gullibility, or playing some elaborate joke. His grip tightened on the folder. We are not joking. Do you understand me? I nodded, not trusting my voice. People have died because they thought they knew better than the rules. Good people, smart people. People who thought they could improvise or find shortcuts or apply common sense. Gerald released the folder and sat back in his chair. The airport doesn't care how smart you are. It doesn't care about your intentions or your reasoning. It only cares whether you follow the rules. He opened a different drawer and pulled out a thin file folder with my name written on the tab. Inside were standard employment documents, tax forms, benefits enrollment, emergency contact information. Normal paperwork for a normal job, except nothing about this conversation felt normal. "You'll work alone most nights," Gerald continued, his voice returning to a more professional tone. "Vincent will train you for 1 week, then you're on your own. Your responsibilities include basic maintenance, minor repairs, monitoring systems, and ensuring that certain protocols are followed precisely." He paused. "The protocols are the most important part of your job. Everything else is secondary." "What kind of protocols?" "The kind that keep you alive." Gerald slid the employment paperwork across the desk. "Sign these, take them to HR on the second floor. Then go home and get some rest. Tomorrow night, your real education begins." I signed the documents with hands that had developed a slight tremor. The pen felt heavier than it should have, and my signature looked shaky compared to its usual confident strokes. Gerald collected the papers with the same deliberate care he'd shown with everything else. "One more thing," he said as I stood to leave. "Don't research the airport's history. Don't look up previous maintenance workers. Don't try to prepare yourself for what you're going to read tomorrow night." His eyes met mine again. "Knowledge without context is dangerous. You'll get the context you need, when you need it." I wanted to ask more questions, but something in Gerald's expression warned me against it. Instead, I mumbled my thanks and left the office, clutching the manila folder like a life preserver. The walk through the airport to HR felt surreal. Passengers moved around me in normal patterns, checking departure boards, buying coffee, arguing with airline representatives about delayed flights. Children ran between the seats while their parents tried to corral them. Business travelers typed furiously on laptops, lost in their own urgent worlds. None of them seemed to notice the maintenance worker walking among them, carrying a folder that supposedly contained life or death instructions. None of them looked toward the shadowy corners where the fluorescent lighting didn't quite reach, or seemed concerned about what happened in this place after they went home to their beds. The HR department was efficiently impersonal. I handed over my paperwork to a woman who processed it with practiced boredom, explained my benefits package in a monotone voice, and handed me an ID badge with my photo and a magnetic strip that would grant me access to employee areas. The badge felt warm in my hand, as if it had been sitting under a heat lamp. "Welcome to Detroit Metropolitan," she said without looking up from her computer. "Try not to let the night shift get to you. Some people find it challenging." I wanted to ask what she meant by that, but she was already calling for the next person in line. 24 hours later, I understood why the security guard at the employee entrance had looked at me with pity when I showed my new ID badge. He was an older man with kind eyes and grey hair, and when he saw my badge, his expression shifted from professional courtesy to something that looked uncomfortably like sympathy. "First night?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. "Yeah, night maintenance." He was quiet for a moment, studying my face as if trying to memorize it. "Follow the rules, son. All of them, even the ones that don't make sense." He buzzed me through the security door. "Especially those ones." Detroit Metropolitan at night was a different creature entirely. The familiar sounds of day shift operations, chattering passengers, rolling luggage, gate announcements, had been replaced by something that felt like held breath. The terminal wasn't empty. Red-eye flights still departed, cleaning crews moved through certain sections, security guards made their rounds, but the energy had changed completely. During the day, airports feel like celebrations of human movement and connection. At night, they feel like waiting rooms for the dead. My footsteps echoed with crystalline clarity as I made my way through the concourse, each sound stretching longer than it should before being swallowed by shadows that seemed too deep for the available lighting. The few passengers I encountered moved like sleepwalkers, their faces pale under the fluorescent glow, their conversations muted to whispers that didn't carry far enough to be understood. I passed a janitor mopping the floor near gate A15, and when I nodded in greeting, he looked up with eyes that had seen too much. He didn't return the nod, just went back to his work with mechanical precision, as if acknowledging other people might be dangerous. The maintenance workshop was located in a service corridor that branched off from the main concourse. I had to use my new badge to access the door, and the magnetic lock disengaged with a sound like a sigh. Inside, fluorescent lights hummed to life automatically, revealing a space that looked like a cross between a janitor's closet and a small laboratory. Tools hung from pegboards in precise arrangements. Spare parts were organized in labeled bins. Multiple clipboards held detailed schedules and checklists. Everything was clean, organized, and somehow threatening in its perfection. Vincent was waiting for me, but he wasn't what I'd expected. Instead of a grizzled veteran, I found a lean man in his 40s who moved with the controlled precision of someone perpetually ready to run. His hair was prematurely grey and his hands were steady, but his eyes never stopped scanning the room as if something might materialize at any moment. "You're Tyler." It wasn't a question. Gerald said, "You seem sensible. I hope he's right." He gave me this folder to read. I held up the manila envelope. Vincent's entire body tensed. "Open it. Read every word 3 times, then we'll talk." I settled into a metal folding chair and broke the seal on the folder. The tape came away easily, as if it had been designed to be opened only once. Inside was a single sheet of paper with 6 rules typed in courier font, each line perfectly aligned. Rule 1, check the temperature in storage room A14 every hour. If it reads below 45 degrees Fahrenheit, reset the thermostat and leave immediately. Rule 2, never perform maintenance in the chapel area between 1:45 AM and 2:15 AM. Rule 3, the water fountain on level 2 near the family restroom requires filter replacement every night at 12:45 AM. Rule 4, if you hear Eminem's Lose Yourself playing from the closed restaurant near gate A23, immediately turn off the main power switch to that section for exactly 8 minutes. Rule 5, never use the freight elevator during the 2 AM hour. Rule 6, the lost and found office must be locked by 11 PM and not opened until 6 AM. I read through them once, twice, 3 times. Each reading made them seem more surreal. The first, second, third, fifth, and 6th rules seemed like standard safety protocols with oddly specific timing requirements, but Rule 4 stood out like a neon sign in the darkness. I looked up at Vincent, who was watching me with the intensity of a man waiting for a bomb to detonate. "Rule 4, I said slowly. "Eminem?" Vincent's laugh was hollow, completely devoid of humour. That's what everyone focuses on, not the temperature anomaly that can freeze a man solid in 30 seconds. Not the chapel that changes things during that window. Not the lost and found office that sometimes contains items that were never lost. He leaned forward. They focus on the rap song. But it's insane, ridiculous. Yeah, that's what the last guy thought too. Found his maintenance badge melted to the restaurant floor. Took 3 days to scrape it off, and even then, we had to replace the tiles underneath. Vincent stood and walked to a supply cabinet. "Tyler, in 8 years, I've heard that song 17 times. 17 times I've dropped everything I was doing and run to that power switch. 17 times I've watched furniture arrange itself into patterns that shouldn't exist while something tried to claw its way into our reality through the baseline." He pulled out a radio and flashlight, setting them on the workbench between us. The radio was newer than I'd expected, with multiple channels and a battery indicator that showed full charge. The flashlight was heavy, military grade, with a beam bright enough to cut through fog. "The rules aren't arbitrary," Vincent continued. "They're antibodies. This place has an immune system, and we're part of it. We're white blood cells moving through the airport's circulatory system. identifying threats and neutralizing them before they can spread. I wanted to laugh, to make a joke about the absurdity of what he was saying, but something in his voice, in the way he moved, in the careful organization of the workshop around us, suggested that laughter would be inappropriate, possibly dangerous. What happens if someone breaks a rule? Vincent was quiet for a long moment, his eyes focused on something I couldn't see. Depends which one. Some get you killed quickly, others take longer. The worst part is that breaking one rule makes it easier to break others, like the airport can sense weakness, can smell fear and indecision. He moved to a filing cabinet and pulled out a thick folder labelled Incident Reports. The pages inside were yellowed with age, and I could see that some of them were written in different handwriting, suggesting multiple authors over many years. March 15th, 2019, Vincent read from one of the pages. Maintenance worker named Carl decided that Rule 2 was ridiculous, figured the chapel was just a room, and rooms don't care what time you clean them. Went in at 2 AM to replace some ceiling tiles. Vincent looked up at me. We found him the next morning, kneeling in front of the altar, still breathing, but his mind was gone. Kept talking about a service he'd attended, describing rituals that don't exist in any known religion. Had to retire him on medical disability. He flipped to another page. June 3rd, 2021. Maintenance worker named Angela thought Rule 6 was bureaucratic nonsense. Why shouldn't she be able to check the lost and found after 11 PM if someone called asking about a missing item? Open the office at 2:30 AM to help a passenger who claimed she'd lost her wedding ring. Vincent's voice dropped. Found Angela in the office the next morning, sitting on the floor, holding 17 identical wedding rings. Each one had a different woman's name engraved inside, and each one was warm to the touch, as if it had just been removed from someone's finger. Oh, my thumb. The incident reports painted a picture of an airport that became something else entirely after dark. Workers who ignored Rule 1 had been found frozen solid in storage room A14, their bodies crystallized at the molecular level. Workers who used the freight elevator during the forbidden hour had emerged on floors that didn't exist, or floors that existed in different decades, or floors where the laws of physics operated under different principles. But it was the reports about Rule 4 that made my hands shake as I read them. The song serves as a beacon, Vincent explained, as I read about maintenance workers who had failed to cut power quickly enough. It calls to something that exists in the spaces between frequencies, in the gaps between beats. The longer it plays, the stronger the signal becomes. Eventually it builds enough momentum to continue playing, even without electrical power, feeding on the resonance of human desperation and ambition. According to the reports, workers who heard "Lose Yourself" and failed to respond immediately became part of whatever force the song was calling. They were found days later, their bodies arranged in spiral patterns around the restaurant's central point, their faces frozen in expressions of terrible understanding. But why that song specifically? I asked. Vincent closed the incident reports and returned them to the filing cabinet. That's above my pay grade. Gerald might know, but he doesn't share that kind of information. What I can tell you is that the song works because it speaks to something fundamental in human nature, the fear of missing opportunities, the weight of unfulfilled potential, the gap between who we are and who we want to be. The tour that followed felt like a descent into a fever dream. Vincent moved through the terminal with practiced efficiency, but I noticed how he avoided looking directly at certain areas, how he paused before entering some corridors, how his hand never strayed far from the radio clipped to his belt. Our first stop was storage room A14, accessed through a service corridor that felt 10 degrees colder than the rest of the basement. The temperature differential was noticeable even before we reached the door, and by the time Vincent unlocked the room, I could see my breath forming small clouds in the air. The thermometer on the wall read 52 degrees, but Vincent checked it anyway, recording the temperature on a clipboard that contained months of hourly readings. I noticed that the readings showed a clear pattern. The temperature dropped below 45 degrees approximately once every 2 weeks, always between 2 AM and 4 AM, always for exactly 47 minutes. Coldest I've ever seen, it was 31 degrees, Vincent said, not looking away from the display. Reset the thermostat and ran. Found ice crystals on the door handle the next morning, shaped like handprints, small handprints like a child's. The room itself was unremarkable. Metal shelving units holding maintenance supplies, boxes of spare parts, cleaning chemicals in clearly labelled containers. But something about the space felt wrong, as if the geometry didn't quite add up. The corners seemed too sharp, the shadows too dark, the air too thick to breathe comfortably. What causes the temperature drops? Vincent shrugged. Above my pay grade. What I know is that when the temperature drops below 45 degrees, something else is in the room with you. Something that brings its own climate. The rule is simple. Reset the thermostat and leave. Don't try to investigate, don't try to understand. Just leave. Our next stop was the chapel, a small interfaith space near gate A18 that seemed unremarkable during our visit. It contained rows of simple wooden chairs facing a multi-faith altar with symbols from various religions displayed in a respectful arrangement. Soft lighting created an atmosphere of peace and contemplation. But Vincent stopped walking 10 feet from the entrance, his entire body rigid with tension. During the forbidden window, people report seeing services in progress. Different denominations each time. Sometimes religions that don't exist anymore. Sometimes religions that don't exist yet. He checked his watch. It's 11:47 now, safe for another 2 hours. What kind of services? The kind that change people. Workers who've glimpsed them report seeing congregations of passengers who died in crashes, led by clergy who speak in languages that predate known human speech. The services last exactly 30 minutes, and anyone who watches the entire thing loses the ability to distinguish between the living and the dead. Vincent showed me the maintenance schedule for the chapel area. During the day, it was cleaned and maintained like any other space. But from 1:45 AM to 2:15 AM, the entire area was off limits to all airport personnel. Security guards were instructed to avoid the corridor entirely during those times. We had a security guard once who didn't believe the warnings, Vincent said as we walked away from the chapel. Figured he'd stand watch outside the entrance during the forbidden window, just to prove nothing would happen. Found him the next morning, sitting in one of the chairs, facing the altar. He was breathing, but his eyes were gone. Not damaged or removed. Gone. As if they had never existed. He kept talking about the beautiful music, about voices singing in harmony. But there was no music, Tyler. The chapel was completely silent. The water fountain on level 2 looked ordinary until Vincent opened the maintenance panel. Behind the false wall was a filtration system far more complex than necessary for a simple drinking fountain. Multiple gauges monitored pressure, flow rate, and something labelled simply as clarity. Additional tubes and sensors connected to equipment I didn't recognise. Water comes from the city main, but by the time it reaches this fountain, it's different. Purer. Sometimes too pure. Vincent began the filter replacement process with ritualistic precision, checking each connection twice before moving to the next step. Maintenance log shows that people who drink from it between midnight and 1 AM report unusual dreams. Prophetic dreams. Dreams about flights that haven't been scheduled yet. The replacement filter was unlike any I'd seen before. Instead of simple carbon or ceramic elements, it contained layers of different materials, arranged in precise patterns. Vincent handled it with latex gloves, never allowing his skin to make direct contact with the filtering media. What makes the water dangerous? Not dangerous, enhanced. The filtration system doesn't just remove impurities, it adds something. something that affects human perception and consciousness. Vincent sealed the filter housing and ran water through the system for several minutes, watching the clarity gauge until it stabilized in the green zone. Day shift workers drink from it all the time without problems, but at night when the airport's energy changes, the water becomes something else. He showed me the maintenance logs for the fountain. Workers who had consumed the water during the forbidden window reported dreams that later came true with disturbing accuracy. They saw plane crashes before they happened, terrorist attacks before they were planned, weather disasters before the storms formed. The dreams were always accurate, but they drove the dreamers insane with the weight of knowledge they couldn't act upon. Why don't you just shut off the fountain at night? Because the dreams serve a purpose. Airport security uses the information indirectly. They increase patrols based on gut feelings, implement additional screening procedures based on random checks, reroute flights based on weather concerns. The fountain provides early warning, but the price is the sanity of anyone who drinks from it during the active hours. The closed restaurant near gate A23 had been shuttered for renovations, according to the official notices posted on its entrance, but the equipment inside was still connected to power. Through the glass doors, I could see tables and chairs stacked against the walls, counters covered with protective plastic, and a sound system that had been left partially connected, despite the supposed renovation work. Vincent showed me the electrical panel, where the main breaker was located, and I noticed that the metal around the switch was scorched black. The scorch marks formed patterns that looked almost like fingerprints, as if someone had grabbed the panel while electricity was flowing through them. Previous maintenance worker hesitated for 12 minutes before cutting power. When we found him, he was sitting in the center of the restaurant, humming along to a song that had stopped playing hours earlier. He couldn't remember his own name, but he could recite every lyric to "Lose Yourself in Perfect Order, Forward and Backward." Vincent opened the panel and showed me the exact switch I would need to flip. 8 minutes, no more, no less. Set a timer if you have to, but don't trust your internal clock. When you're listening to that song, time moves differently. What happens during those 8 minutes? The furniture rearranges itself, every time different patterns, sometimes spirals, sometimes geometric shapes, sometimes formations that hurt to look at because they suggest dimensions our minds weren't designed to process. Vincent closed the panel and stepped back. Security cameras malfunctioned during those 8 minutes. Audio recording equipment produces only static. Whatever happens in that room during the blackout, it's not meant for human observation. The freight elevator was hidden in a service area that most passengers never saw. It was larger than normal elevators designed to move equipment and supplies between levels, but the control panel had been modified with additional buttons that weren't labelled. Some of the buttons were covered with black electrical tape as if they had been deliberately disabled. Between 2 and 3 AM, it moves on its own, stops at floors that don't exist. Sometimes when the doors open, you can see other versions of the airport inside, versions where things went wrong. Vincent pressed the call button and we waited. The elevator arrived with a soft chime that echoed longer than it should have in the enclosed space. Other versions? Parallel timelines, alternate realities, outcomes that might have been. Vincent stepped inside the elevator and showed me the control panel. During day shift it works fine. At night it becomes something else. A doorway between possibilities. The normal floor buttons were clearly labelled B for basement, 1 for ground level, 2 for the upper concourse, 3 for the administrative offices. But the additional buttons were marked with symbols I didn't recognise, geometric shapes that seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at them. We had a maintenance worker who used the freight elevator at 2:30 AM because he was running late for a repair on level 3. Doors opened on what looked like the same floor, but everything was wrong. The gates were different numbers, The restaurants had different names. The passengers were wearing clothes from decades ago. Vincent stepped out of the elevator and I followed. He spent 6 hours trying to find his way back to our reality. When he finally made it, he'd aged 3 years in one night. The lost and found office was a cramped space filled with abandoned luggage, but as Vincent unlocked the door, I noticed that some of the items inside didn't match what you'd expect from travellers. A child stuffed animal that looked decades old, despite being reported lost yesterday. A smartphone displaying text messages from numbers that didn't exist. A wedding ring inscribed with names in a language that predated known alphabets. Rule is, you lock it at 11 PM and don't open it until 6 AM. Items that are placed inside during those hours have a tendency to multiply, or transform, or reveal their true nature. Vincent locked the door and tested the handle twice. Last month, someone reported losing a simple silver bracelet. When day shift opened the office, they found 17 identical bracelets, but each one showed a different date of death engraved on the inside. The office was organised with the same meticulous care I'd seen throughout the airport's maintenance areas. Lost items were catalogued and stored according to strict procedures, but I noticed that some of the shelves contained items that seemed too old to be recent losses. A leather suitcase with travel stickers from airlines that hadn't existed for decades. A hat box containing vintage clothing that looked like it had been tailored for someone with unusual proportions. What happens to the items that transform? They're transferred to a special storage facility. Gerald handles that part of the operation, above my pay grade. Vincent showed me the logbook where lost items were recorded. Some entries were written in different handwriting, suggesting multiple shifts of workers over many years. What I can tell you is that the items left here overnight sometimes remember things that haven't happened yet, or things that happened to people who don't exist in our timeline. We returned to the workshop and Vincent handed me the radio and flashlight. The radio was already programmed with the correct frequencies. Channel 1 for maintenance, Channel 2 for security, Channel 3 for emergencies. The flashlight had fresh batteries and a backup power source. Your shift runs 10 PM to 6 AM. I'll be here for your first week, then you're alone. Follow the rules exactly as written. No exceptions, no modifications, no clever interpretations. Vincent's voice carried the weight of hard experience. The airport doesn't care about your reasons or your logic. It only cares about compliance. What happens if I break one of the rules? Vincent was quiet for a long moment, staring at the pegboard where tools hung in precise arrangements. Depends which one. Some get you killed quickly, others take longer. The worst part is that breaking one rule makes it easier to break others, like the airport can sense weakness. He opened another filing cabinet and pulled out a different folder, this one labelled Personnel Records. Inside were employee files for maintenance workers going back several years. Most of the files were thin, containing only basic hiring information and brief employment records, but several files were marked with red stamps, terminated, cause unknown, or missing, investigation closed, or simply transferred. This is what happens when people don't follow the rules exactly, Vincent said, spreading some of the files on the workbench. Carl, who thought the chapel was just a room. Angela, who opened the lost and found after hours. Marcus, who decided Rule 4 was someone's idea of a joke. Rebecca, who used the freight elevator during the forbidden hour because she was tired of taking the stairs. Each file told a similar story. Competent workers who had started with good intentions and ended with tragedy. The details varied, but the pattern was consistent. Someone would decide that a rule was arbitrary or unnecessary. They would modify their behaviour slightly, thinking they could improve upon the established procedures, and then they would disappear, or worse. The rules exist because people died to create them, Vincent said, closing the files. Every rule represents someone's last mistake. Every protocol is written in blood. My first 3 nights passed smoothly, almost anticlimactically. I checked storage room A14 every hour, finding temperatures stable between 51 and 53 degrees. I replaced the water fountain filter at precisely 12:45 AM each night, following Vincent's methodical process, step by step. I avoided the chapel during its forbidden window and used the stairs instead of the freight elevator after 2 AM. I locked the lost and found office at 11 PM sharp and didn't think about what might be happening inside during the dark hours. Vincent shadowed me through each shift, offering guidance and encouragement. He seemed pleased with my adherence to the rules, my willingness to follow procedures without questioning their logic. By the third night, I was beginning to feel confident in my abilities. "You're doing well," Vincent said as we finished our rounds at 5 AM. "Better than most. Some people can't handle the precision required. They want to understand everything before they act, but this job requires faith more than understanding. It's not so bad once you get used to the routine." Vincent's expression darkened. "Don't get comfortable. Comfort leads to complacency, and complacency kills. The airport is patient. It waits for you to let your guard down, to think you've figured out the system. That's when it strikes." On the fourth night, at 2:31 AM, I heard it for the first time. The opening piano notes of "Lose Yourself" drifted through the terminal like smoke, seeming to emanate from the direction of the closed restaurant. I was replacing a burned-out bulb near gate A19, and I dropped my tools immediately. The crash echoed through the empty terminal as I ran toward the electrical panel. My hands shook as I yanked open the panel and flipped the main breaker. The music stopped as if a needle had been lifted from a record. Sudden silence filled the corridor, broken only by the sound of my own ragged breathing. I started counting, watching the seconds tick by on my phone's display. In the darkness, I could hear something moving inside the restaurant. Chairs scraping against floor, tables sliding across tile, the soft percussion of objects being rearranged with purposeful intent. The sounds formed a rhythm that almost matched the beat of the song that had just stopped playing. At exactly 8 minutes, I restored power. Light flooded back into the corridor, and I approached the restaurant's glass doors with careful steps. Inside, every piece of furniture had been rearranged into a perfect spiral pattern, radiating outward from a central point where the floor tiles seemed to reflect light differently than they should. The spiral was beautiful and terrible at the same time. The furniture was arranged with mathematical precision, each table and chair positioned to create flowing curves that drew the eye inexorably towards the center. But looking at the formation too long made my head ache, as if my brain was trying to process geometry that violated fundamental laws of space and time. Vincent found me standing there 20 minutes later, still staring through the glass. "First time?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. "Gets easier. Sort of." He peered through the doors at the spiral formation. "Tomorrow morning, day shift will find everything back in its normal position. They always do, like it never happened." What would have happened if I hadn't cut the power? Vincent pointed to a dark stain on the floor tiles, barely visible in the dim lighting. The stain was roughly human-shaped, but the proportions were wrong, as if whoever had left it behind had been stretched or compressed in ways that defied anatomy. That's all that's left of the maintenance worker who didn't follow Rule 4. Blood and something else, something that used to be human, but got pulled into whatever exists at the center of that spiral. Vincent's voice was matter-of-fact, but I could hear the underlying tension. Security tried to clean it up, but the stain comes back every few months, like the floor remembers what happened there. Over the next 3 nights, the song played twice more. Each time I cut power immediately and watched the furniture dance in the darkness. Each time Vincent appeared afterward to check on me, offering silent approval with a nod and brief words of encouragement. The patterns were different each time. On the 5th night, the tables and chairs arranged themselves in concentric circles, like ripples in a pond. On the 7th night, they formed parallel lines that created corridors leading toward the center point. But regardless of the specific configuration, the effect was always the same. A hypnotic formation that seemed to call to something deep in the human psyche. "It's getting stronger," Vincent observed after the 7th night's incident. "The song used to play maybe once a week. Now it's happening more frequently. And the furniture movements are becoming more complex." "What does that mean?" "It means whatever the song is calling to is getting closer, or hungrier, or both." Vincent made notes in a logbook that I hadn't seen before. "Gerald will want to know about the increased frequency. This might require additional precautions." On my 8th night, I was alone for the first time. Vincent had completed my training and moved on to other responsibilities. He'd spent the previous evening reviewing all the procedures one final time, testing my knowledge with scenarios and hypothetical situations. I'd answered every question correctly, demonstrated perfect recall of the rules, and shown appropriate respect for the protocols. "You're ready," he'd said as he gathered his things. "Remember, the rules aren't suggestions, they're absolutes. Follow them exactly, and you'll be fine." The evening started routinely. I checked storage room A14 at 11 p.m, temperature holding steady at 53 degrees. I locked the lost and found office, noting that several new items had appeared during the day, including a briefcase that hummed softly when I walked past it and a vintage camera that seemed to follow my movements with its lens. At 12:45 a.m, I replaced the water fountain filter, watching the complex filtration system cycle through its cleaning process. The clarity gauge fluctuated wildly during the replacement, swinging from green to red and back again before finally stabilizing in the acceptable range. At 1:30 a.m, I was in the basement level, replacing a section of corroded pipe that had been leaking for weeks. The work was more complex than Vincent had indicated. Multiple connections needed to be sealed. The water valve proved difficult to close completely, and the replacement pipe section didn't fit as perfectly as the work order had suggested. I was sweating despite the cool temperature, focused entirely on preventing a flood that would damage thousands of dollars worth of electrical equipment stored in the adjacent room. The pipe connection required precise alignment, and the sealant had to be applied in exactly the right amount to prevent future leaks. That's when I heard it. The opening notes of "Lose Yourself" echoed down from the level above, but I was at a critical point in the repair. Water was still trickling from the main connection, and if I didn't finish tightening the fitting, the pipe would burst and flood the entire basement. Just 30 more seconds to complete the job properly. I could hear the song getting louder, but I convinced myself I had time. Rule 4 said to cut power immediately, but immediately could mean after securing the water valve, right? The song had just started. I had maybe a minute before it built up enough momentum to become dangerous. The lyrics began, echoing through the basement with crystalline clarity. His palms are sweaty, knees weak, arms are heavy. Each word seemed to resonate with my current situation. The pressure of the job, the fear of making a mistake, the weight of responsibility pressing down on my shoulders. I cranked down on the pipe fitting with desperate efficiency, applied sealant to the connection, and gathered my tools. The music was echoing through the terminal now, but I could still reach the power switch in time. Everything would be fine. I just needed to finish this one critical task, and then I'd follow the rule exactly as written. The song was building intensity as I reached the main level, and I could feel it vibrating through the floor tiles. The bass line seemed to synchronize with my heartbeat, creating a rhythm that made my movements feel sluggish and dreamlike. When I yanked open the electrical panel and flipped the breaker, nothing happened. The music continued playing. I flipped the breaker again, checking to make sure I had the right switch. The power to that section was definitely off. I could see that the lights in the restaurant had gone dark, but the song was still playing, still building in intensity, still calling to something that I couldn't see but could feel approaching. Panic clawed at my throat as I realized what had happened. By delaying my response, I had allowed the song to build enough momentum to continue playing even without electrical power. It was feeding on something else now, something that didn't require outlets or circuits or any connection to the physical infrastructure of the airport. I ran to the restaurant and pressed my face against the glass doors. Inside, every piece of furniture was moving in perfect synchronization with the beat. Tables and chairs rotated around the room in concentric circles, gradually spiraling inward towards a central point where the floor tiles had begun to glow with soft phosphorescent light. The movement was hypnotic, beautiful in a way that made my chest tight with longing. Each table spun on its axis while following a larger orbital pattern, creating layers of motion that suggested meaning just beyond my comprehension. The chairs moved in formation like dancers, their legs creating percussion against the tile floor that complemented the song's rhythm. But it was wrong. I knew it was wrong, even as part of me wanted to watch the dance continue. The patterns were too perfect, too coordinated, too purposeful for inanimate objects. Whatever was controlling the furniture wasn't bound by the laws of physics that govern normal matter. The song was in my head now, not just in my ears. Every word resonated with something deep inside me. The fear of failure, the weight of unemployment, the desperate need to prove myself in this job. You only get one shot, the lyrics insisted, and I understood with horrible clarity that I had already missed mine. My hands moved to the door handles without conscious thought. The metal was warm, almost hot, and I could feel vibrations running through it in rhythm with the music. The warmth spread up my arms as I touched the handles, carrying with it a sense of invitation, of welcome, of homecoming. As I pushed the doors open, the song became overwhelming, filling not just my ears but my entire body, my soul. The restaurant's interior was larger than it should have been, as if the walls had expanded to accommodate the furniture's elaborate choreography. The ceiling stretched higher, creating space for patterns that extended in 3 dimensions. I walked towards the center of the spiral, where the chairs and tables continued their hypnotic dance. The glowing tiles beneath my feet pulsed in time with the baseline, and each step sent waves of phosphorescence radiating outward like ripples in a luminous pond. The lyrics surrounded me now, speaking directly to my deepest fears and desires. Every line about opportunity and second chances, about not letting moments slip away, about rising above circumstances and seizing control of destiny. It all felt written specifically for me, for this moment, for the choice I was about to make. Lose yourself in the music, the moment. You own it. You better never let it go. I could see other shapes moving in the light, shadows of people who had walked this path before me, all of them reaching towards something I couldn't yet see, but could feel calling to me. They moved in perfect synchronization with the furniture, part of the same vast choreography that was drawing me toward the center. The spiral was tightening around me now, furniture moving faster as it approached the epicenter. I realized that this was how all the previous maintenance workers had disappeared. They had heard the song and failed to act immediately, allowing it to build power until it could pull them into whatever existed at the heart of its rhythm. But understanding didn't free me from the compulsion. If anything, the knowledge made the song more powerful, because now I knew exactly what was happening and chose to continue anyway. The music promised transformation, promised that whatever waited at the center would make me part of something larger and more significant than a night shift maintenance worker at an airport. As I stepped into the glowing center of the spiral, I felt the song's true power wash over me. It wasn't just music, it was a beacon, a signal, a call to something that existed in the spaces between reality and possibility. The furniture stopped moving, frozen in perfect formation around me, and I understood that I had become the focal point of their dance. The last coherent thought I had was about Vincent's warning. The rules weren't arbitrary, they were antibodies. And I had just infected the system by failing to respond quickly enough to a threat I should have recognized. The music reached its crescendo as I surrendered to the light, and Tyler, the maintenance worker, ceased to exist. What remained became part of something larger, something that would continue to play Lose Yourself in the closed restaurant, waiting for the next person who would hesitate when immediate action was required. Vincent found my tools in the basement the next morning, along with a perfectly repaired pipe that showed professional quality workmanship. The water valve was properly sealed, the connections were tight, and there was no evidence of the leak that had been reported for weeks. But Tyler was nowhere to be found. Security footage showed me entering the restaurant area at 2:47 a.m., but the cameras had experienced a complete system failure during the crucial minutes that followed. The timestamp jumped from 2 hours, 47 minutes and 23 seconds to 2 hours, 55 minutes and 41 seconds with no intermediate frames, as if those 8 minutes had been surgically removed from time itself. Gerald reviewed the incident with the same quiet resignation he had shown many times before. He sat in his cramped office studying my employee file and the incident report that Vincent had filed with clinical precision. The facts were simple. Another maintenance worker had failed to follow Rule 4, exactly as written. Gerald opened the filing cabinet where the manila folders were stored and pulled out a fresh copy of the protocols. Using a pen that trembled slightly in his weathered hands, he updated Rule 4 to include additional emphasis. If you hear Eminem's Lose Yourself playing from the closed restaurant near gate A23, immediately turn off the main power switch to that section for exactly 8 minutes. Do not delay for any reason. Do not finish other tasks first. Immediately means immediately. He made additional notes in the margins, underscoring the importance of the word immediately, and adding a footnote about the consequences of hesitation. Future maintenance workers would understand that some rules admitted no exceptions, no matter how logical those exceptions might seem. 3 weeks later, Gerald interviewed Derek, a former hotel maintenance worker who seemed eager and competent. Derek had managed building systems for a major hotel chain, dealing with everything from plumbing emergencies to electrical failures. He asked intelligent questions about the job responsibilities and demonstrated familiarity with the types of equipment he would be maintaining. The position requires strict adherence to established protocols, Gerald explained, watching Derek's face carefully for signs of the overconfidence that had killed previous workers. Some of our procedures may seem unusual, but they exist for important reasons. I understand completely, Derek replied. In hotel maintenance, following procedures exactly can be the difference between a minor repair and a major disaster. I'm very comfortable with detailed protocols. Gerald handed him the manila folder, noting how Derek accepted it with appropriate seriousness. Read these on your first shift. Follow them exactly. Vincent will train you for 1 week, then you'll be on your own. As Derek left the office with his folder, Gerald made a note in his files about the importance of stressing immediate compliance during the training period. He also added a reminder to have Vincent share details about my disappearance, hoping that concrete examples might prevent another tragedy. Vincent trained Derek with even more intensity than he had shown with me, sharing details about my fate that he hoped would emphasize the deadly seriousness of the rules. He explained how hesitation, even for understandable reasons, could turn protective protocols into death sentences. The last worker, Tyler, was a good guy, Vincent said as they stood outside the closed restaurant. Smart, careful, followed most of the rules perfectly, but when he heard the song, he thought he had time to finish another task first. That delay cost him everything. Derek listened with appropriate gravity, asking questions that demonstrated his understanding of the risks involved. He seemed to grasp the concept that the airport's night shift operated under different laws than the normal world, and that survival depended on absolute compliance with established procedures. What exactly happens to workers who break the rules? They become part of whatever system the rules are designed to contain, Vincent replied. They don't die in any conventional sense. They transform into something else, something that serves the airport's hidden purposes. The training week passed without incident. Derek followed every protocol exactly, demonstrated proper response procedures, and showed appropriate respect for the forces that the rules were designed to control. On his 8th night, Vincent felt confident enough to leave him alone. "Remember," Vincent said as he prepared to leave, "the rules aren't suggestions. They're the difference between going home at the end of your shift and becoming part of something that should never have existed in the first place." Derek's first solo shift proceeded smoothly until 2:17 a.m, when the familiar opening notes of "Lose Yourself" began echoing from the closed restaurant. Unlike Tyler, Derek didn't hesitate. He dropped his tools immediately and ran to the electrical panel, flipping the breaker within seconds of hearing the first piano notes. The song stopped abruptly, cut off before it could build momentum. During the 8-minute blackout that followed, Derek stood guard outside the restaurant, listening to the furniture rearrange itself in the darkness. When he restored power, he found the tables and chairs formed in a simple spiral pattern, far less complex than the formations that had appeared during Tyler's final night. The airport continued its dual existence, a normal transportation hub during the day, and something far more dangerous at night. The rules evolved as needed, incorporating lessons learned from each failure. Future maintenance workers would understand that some protocols existed specifically because previous workers had found creative ways to die by not following them exactly. Gerald had supervised night maintenance for 15 years, and he had learned that immediate action saves lives. The rules weren't suggestions or guidelines. They were the difference between survival and becoming part of something that fed on human ambition and desperation. The restaurant near Gate A23 remained closed for renovations, but sometimes night security would notice that its furniture had been rearranged in spiral patterns that defied explanation. They would restore everything to its proper position and file reports that gathered dust in filing cabinets, part of the endless documentation of phenomena that couldn't be officially acknowledged. And on quiet nights, when the terminal was nearly empty and the shadows grew long, the opening notes of "Lose Yourself" would echo through the corridors. New maintenance workers learned to drop everything and run toward the electrical panel, understanding that immediate action was the only thing standing between them and becoming part of the song themselves. The music would play again because it was patient and clever, and always ready to exploit the gap between hearing a rule and following it completely. Some opportunities I had learned too late are actually traps designed to catch people who think they can manage their time better than the rules allow. In the end, the most dangerous moment isn't when you don't know what to do. It's when you know exactly what to do, but convince yourself you have time to do something else first. The airport understood this weakness in human nature and used it to feed whatever hungry thing lived in the spaces between beats, in the gaps between decisions, in the fatal pause between knowing and acting. My consciousness, what remained of it, existed now as part of that system. I could feel other minds that had been absorbed over the years, maintenance workers who had thought they knew better than the rules, who had believed they could find shortcuts or improvements to establish procedures. We were all part of the song now, our individual voices merged into the harmony that called to future victims. And sometimes on the quietest nights, when a new maintenance worker stood hesitating outside the electrical panel, wondering if they really needed to act so quickly, I tried to whisper a warning through the music, but my voice was lost in the chorus of the consumed, and the song played on, patient and eternal, waiting for the next person who would think they had time to spare.